Okay, I think we can start now. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Connect Health Tech panel discussion on how AI and machine learning are transforming the clinical pathway. First of all, thanks so much for the Connect Health Tech team, Paula and other members, and also thanks a lot for our panel. So we are having a fantastic panelists today. I will introduce in a minute. And this event is being held as part of the Innovate UK ARC Innovation Festival. And I'm Namsh Khan. I'm head of the Computational Research and AI at the Miller Therapeutics Institute in the university. And also I have an associate faculty position in Cambridge Center for AI Medicine in the same university. And I'm also having a small startup company called Cardiatech, where we're having AI drug discovery on cardiovascular disease in Cambridge. I'm very happy and really delighted to chair this event today and engage you all in discussion and debate for the next hour. So our panel of leading experts will share insights and explore how AI and machine learning is reducing drug discovery timeframes and improving early detection of diagnostics. We will also have a case study looking at the benefits of AI from clinical perspective today. So on our expert speakers today are Professor Andreas Flotter. He's a co-director of Cambridge Center for AI Medicine, where I'm also working in, and also Dr. Ellen McDonough, she is Open Target Informatics Scientific Director at Amble EBI. And Joe Day, he's a business development executive for AI and data science in Cancer Research Horizons. And finally, Professor Kourosh Saipasi is an honorary consultant and transplant surgeon in the Adam Brooks Hospital. And also he has his lab in Department of Surgery under the University of Cambridge. So yeah, as I said, we have fantastic list up. Sorry. We will start with Andres today, giving us an overview of the landscape of life science and AI machine learning, followed by Ellie and Joe. They will giving their own perspectives of the opportunities and challenges in embedding AI and machine learning across the clinical pathway. This will be followed by a case study from Kourosh, who will highlight a case study from a clinical perspective. After Kourosh, we will start with a discussion leading to the Q&A session, where I'm sure there will be lots of questions from your, please using the chat function to ask the questions. We will also recording this event today, and this will be released in our Connect Health Tech community tomorrow. And after this panel discussion, which will finish at 2 p.m. There will be a follow-up session to dealing with a few remaining questions. So please move on to the Connect Health Tech. We will give you a link at the end of the event, so you can move on, and then you can kind of have another chance to ask. So let's move straight on our speakers. So Andres, it's over to you.
Thanks, Namshik, and the other organizers for the invitation to talk today. I was given the brief to provide a kind of overview of the landscape, and I've taken this as a kind of carte blanche to talk about a few things for 5 minutes that might be of interest. So as Namshik mentioned, I'm co-director with Mahela van der Schaar of the Cambridge Center for AI in Medicine, which was established a couple of years ago with support from AstraZeneca and GSK, really to try and tackle this exact issue of transforming healthcare and life sciences through AI in medicine. I'm also an academic physician, and I think that opportunity to support the interface between these two areas is extremely exciting. So I think it's fair to say that so far there is significant unfulfilled potential from machine learning and AI in biomedicine. And I kind of characterize this with this idea of kind of information loss. That's to say that the domain experts within biomedicine fail really to appreciate the capacity and scope of machine learning methods, particularly the advanced new methods, but also have difficulty in framing problems in a way that is tangible to data scientists. And conversely, from the machine learning perspective, I think not understanding the domain sufficiently well and being able to encode prior knowledge to machine learning solutions has so far remained a real challenge. So I see this kind of failure of communication as one of the key hurdles to overcome in order to accelerate AI and machine learning for all sorts of medicine and healthcare applications. So you can imagine that machine learning and AI can act as a discovery tool for biomedicine and create generative models of systems that understand the causal relationship between features. Discover mechanistic understanding both at the kind of cellular or even molecular level, but also at the population level or within the healthcare setting, and provide solutions for some major challenges that still exist. And conversely, you can see how biomedicine can act as a motivator for advances in machine learning by, as I say, mandating or insisting on the inclusion of prior knowledge into algorithms, and almost driving innovation within data science to understand ways in which we can embed complex feature relationships within models. And importantly, insisting on delivering actionable intelligence, that is to say, it's stuff that can actually make a difference. And so I guess when I kind of reflect on the opportunities of machine learning and AI to impact on life science research, I see a spectrum starting at one end with biomedical discovery biology. And I'm sure we can all think of examples where AI and machine learning have already made big impacts in structural modeling and systems analysis and in cheminformatics, but I still think there's a huge amount that can be achieved with existing tools. Then there's the challenge, I think, of omics integration and analysis when, the data, the plethora of data, the richness and diversity of large omic data sets is present, and to try and find novel and innovative ways to integrate these in order to provide insight. And as I mentioned, one of the key areas which I'm particularly interested in is understanding applications of machine learning and AI to population level problems. So novel ways of delivering clinical trials, early diagnostics, personalized therapy, this idea of individualizing or predicting individual clinical trajectories and therefore understanding individual treatment effects and perhaps producing counterfactual estimations. And finally, there's an opportunity to use machine learning in terms of implementation of healthcare. So that's the level of the hospital or indeed the NHS in terms of learning healthcare systems, understanding ways to optimize monitoring, so active sensing, applications in home monitoring and assisted triage. So I thought I'd give you kind of a snapshot of each of these, and I take structural biology because I think there are two major existing challenges. Predicting the impact of mutations in cancer, in antimicrobial resistance, and in functional genomics. I could also add the associated problems of inferring transcriptional information from genomic data. And then this whole area of in silico screening and drug discovery, so understanding ligand binding in a context where this may well be a multi-objective optimization problem. And then on the multi-omics analysis, just to give you a kind of flavor of what I mean, enormous amounts of phenotypic data to add to the proteomics, metabolomics, transcriptomics, epigenetics, and genomic information. And the idea is to kind of find ways to integrate these to identify patterns, and again infer causality, generate models that are understandable, and predict treatment effects and find new treatments. And an example here is understanding the cellular response in the context of diseases, or when you perturb systems with drugs, and how they might lead to outcomes, allows you in theory then to predict what a new drug might do to a cellular response and therefore provide you with a new therapy. I think this kind of approach is beginning to gain traction. There's a few very high profile successes in this area. But in terms of understanding complex diseases, in terms of clinical, the patient journey, understanding how and who and when to treat, is this idea of developing causal structural models for diseases at different levels of complexity, from the kind of most basic, which is the associational, what is related to this outcome, the interventional, can I understand what would happen if I do X? And then finally, perhaps the most complex is the counterfactual. What if I had given this patient X instead of Y? And I think these kind of rich data sources have enormous potential information to inform and direct biomedical research. An example we've used over the past few years is in cystic fibrosis. So at an individual treatment level, we can, for these patients with very complex chronic diseases, understand risks of complications, and very often they're competing risks. So transplantation versus mortality versus liver failure, individualized treatment trajectories, and as I mentioned before, understanding individual treatment effects. And then from the home monitoring side of things, as an example of my fourth category, you can imagine now with the sensor innovations, the opportunity to use handheld phones, Bluetooth-enabled devices to rapidly and at scale upload data over a whole range of physiological parameters, or simply just use an Apple Watch. But I think there's a lot of excitement around new sensor development and the clinical implementation. So providing immediate support for clinical teams using to support patient care, but at the same time generate rich data sets for AI researchers to exploit. And I just give a shameless plug for our clinical trials starting Q1 next year, funded by LifeArc and NIHR, on a decision support machine learning algorithm to predict future deterioration in CF patients using exactly this this set of home monitoring tools. So, as you will all be aware, advances in machine learning and AI are enormous and ever increasing. I'll just give you here a selection of the different types of methodologies that are being developed that have immediate impact or potential impact in AI and healthcare, in biomedicine and healthcare. And I won't go through them now, but you can see that there is enormous opportunity. And I think this kind of information gap between what is possible and what the domain experts believe is possible is something that we're hoping to bridge within the center. And I would encourage everyone to reach out and learn more about. So this is a kind of aspirational view of where we see machine learning fitting in this environment. At the center, really, providing actionable intelligence to clinical practitioners through analysis of the EMR data, generating hypotheses for biomedical researchers, facilitating analysis of omics data sets, and then data-induced causal discovery for drug development. And I think I'll stop there and obviously pick up on many of these in the panel discussions. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Andres. I mean, that's very, very insightful and very comprehensive overview. Thanks so much. And now I think we are moving on to the next talk from Ellie.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen here. Sorry. Let's see if that works now. Thank you. Thanks very much, Namshik. Yes, I wanted to give a brief overview of our approach to AI at Open Targets. So Open Targets is a partnership between academic institutes and industrial partners with a vision to identify targets together. So early on in the clinical pipeline, we systematically use evidence to build therapeutic hypotheses between targets and diseases, ultimately in the hope of making safer and more effective medicines. And we do this by generating our own data through experimental program and informatics program, combining this and integrating this with publicly available data to help provide evidence between targets and disease. And we know that genetic evidence, sorry, I'm trying to click forward, that's it. Genetic evidence, we and others have shown how important genetic evidence is between target and disease for drugs to be successful. So genetics is a major foundation of the data that we bring in. And in terms of how we use AI in genetics, we use this to answer a specific scientific challenge, which is how do we predict causal genes for diseases from GWAS loci, which was a challenge posed to us by industry. And we do this, we developed a machine learning pipeline that helps prioritize and score likely causal genes at each GWAS loci. We bring in now almost 60,000 different GWAS studies to do this, based on sort of the relative strength of genetic and functional genomics features within that machine learning pipeline. And this is all available through our genetics portal, and you can read more about the method in this paper. And then in our Open Targets platform, which is another of our open source resources, we help to prioritize targets for diseases, bringing in multiple different data types. And we use AI to extract knowledge from large data corpuses. So this includes, for example, we developed an NLP pipeline to classify why clinical trials had been terminated. So the example in the middle, you can see this particular clinical trial was terminated due to safety reasons. And then we downweigh the evidence for that particular target. We also use named entity recognition to pull out targets, disease and drug relationships from the huge corpus of scientific literature. We have a machine learning model to extract data from drug labels as well, that's developed at Campbell. And then we also help others with their AI applications by providing nice integrated, standardized, harmonized data set that's all openly available and cloud compatible as well. So you can query the data through our GraphQL API or Google BigQuery, but it's all available to download too. And all our software code is also open source. So here are just some examples of where people have utilized our data, integrating that into knowledge graphs, for example, or for training sets to develop machine learning approaches. So that's a very quick overview of our approach to AI. And we have a community page where you can post suggestions, questions, and we're very open to collaborations as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellie. That's perfect. Very good. Very interesting. So now let's ask Joe to share his thoughts and experience in this domain.
Thanks, thanks, Samshik, and thanks very much for the Connect Health team for inviting me to speak at this. So I've been asked to kind of talk about the opportunities and challenges at a high level. Don't have any slides, so I'm just going to kind of talk through that. But I guess start with the opportunities, as we've kind of seen from Andreas' talk earlier. There's massive opportunities with artificial intelligence. At a high level, the benefit of AI is being able to analyze, identify patterns across massive data sets at a level which humans aren't otherwise able to do. So I guess because of the complexity of diseases that we're dealing with, particularly from my angle, looking at sort of cancer, this level of analytical capability is really important to understanding the underlying biology of disease, but also kind of the specific clinical context for that individual patient within the context of the disease. So the first big opportunity there is looking at how AI can lead to more personalized and more nuanced and effective personalized medicine. And a great example of this is looking at a sort of early detection field, which Andreas alluded to with his work around the sort of cystic fibrosis element. But there's really important early detection in cancer, for example, because it massively improves the sort of outcomes and treatments that you can give to patients. But the need for it is identifying very subtle, sometimes very non-specific patterns across a large amount of data. So trying to work with that and trying to do that without some sort of advanced analytical capabilities such as AI is almost impossible. So now that we are able to use AI, we're actually able to kind of bring together these different things from the various different technologies that we have at our disposal, things like wearables, things like electronic health records, to actually identify potential signs of early disease and triage those patients into clinical care pathways more quickly. And I guess this is becoming, particularly in the cancer space, much more important with the introduction of multi-cancer detection tests, such as the Gallery test from Grail, which is actually it could be very impactful, but it's quite expensive. So actually trying to identify patients who are at highest risk of cancer, so we can kind of effectively stratify those risk identifying multi-cancer tests is really important. And I guess the second massive opportunity in this space is around this sort of ability to reduce resource and cost requirements for delivery of care. So everyone knows the cost of care delivery is spiraling out of control, and the workforce is somewhat overstretched. So AI potentially has the ability to kind of reduce that burden by performing some of the sort of more repetitive or data-driven tasks and helping to kind of focus researchers or clinicians' time on the more, I guess, challenging or difficult subjects that they need to face. So one of the biggest areas that is kind of having an impact in at the moment is sort of around image analysis, both in radiology and pathology. So acting as a sort of either initial triage to kind of remove the normal cases from radiology screens, or highlighting kind of abnormal areas in pathology slides can really help to kind of reduce the burden on those very overstretched areas and help those skilled professionals to kind of focus in on the most challenging cases and spend the time where it's most needed. So I guess in a summary of the opportunities, I guess the real benefit of AI is able to handle more data and come to decisions more quickly. So hopefully that can actually end up kind of leading to more effective care. And I guess on the challenge side, there's lots of challenges here. There's obviously massive opportunity, but the challenges are quite significant as well. And I guess the first major challenge is the public perception of AI. To some extent, AI is very closely tied into the data, and there's been lots of issues. Well, there's been a sort of very high-profile issue with DeepMind and Royal Free that people will probably know about. There's been issues around the sort of release of data and the use of data around GDPR and things like that, which has kind of undermined the public trust in AI and data, which can mean that it's kind of slow to adopt into the healthcare system and slow to trust, both by patients but also clinicians who would then have to be kind of using that to inform decisions. The second major challenge is around the sort of availability and the access to data. Obviously, the data is needed in two locations actually to train the systems, and I know that Namshik's team are always looking for more data to supplement what they're doing at Amilna, but actually accessing high quality data in the sort of scale that's needed to train these systems so that they're accurate, particularly in a clinical setting where the accuracy is absolutely crucial when you're informing treatment decisions, is difficult. But then actually when it comes to deployment as well, bringing all together within an NHS IT infrastructure, these different data sets or different types of data that need to be analysed to have the most impact for AI is actually difficult. And whether the NHS is ready for AI tools to be kind of linking these multiple different data sets is still up for discussion. And I guess the final point to make is around sort of when you're actually deploying these systems into the clinical pathways, the regulatory and reimbursement mechanisms for AI tools are not yet defined. So it's quite a new area for regulators. They're sort of working to try and catch up on it, but it's still not very clear what the sort of process needs to be around validation of these tools to actually be ready to be deployed into the NHS system. So that's a real area which is slowing adoption down. And I know that NICE and MHRA and various other regulatory authorities are working to try and provide more updated guidance and work with companies to enable that integration. That's something that's, I guess, helping to reducing the uptake of this AI and impacting its ability to impact clinical pathway. But hopefully that's a useful introduction to some opportunity challenges. I'm looking forward to discussing more in a minute.
Thanks a lot, Joe. I mean, yeah, fantastic. Thanks for nicely summarizing the opportunity and also the real world challenges. So yeah, we're gonna discuss it later on for sure. So it's time for Kroish to hear more clinical perspective. So it's over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody, for the invitation to speak at this meeting today. Those were fantastic introductions and particularly relevant in terms of Joe's presentation. What I'd like to do is to focus on two case studies where we could potentially be applying machine learning and artificial intelligence approaches to solve challenges. I picked two examples, one whereby it's sort of the data that routinely is already available, but perhaps we're not utilizing its full potential, and AI could be helping us do that. And second is just to give you an example of a study that we're doing with Namshit's group to look at the analysis of more complex novel transitional data. I have a disclosure to make. I'm Chief Medical Officer at Oxford Immune Algorithmics, and some of the one of the case studies that I speak about relates to some of the work that we're doing at Oxford Immune Algorithmics. Now, for really for AI and machine learning approaches to deliver full impact in healthcare, I think there are a number of requirements relating to the data. Now, we have challenges relating to the generation of the data itself. Do we have sufficient data and the quality of the data? And then what are the costs associated with generating this level of data? Who has access to this data? Who should have access to data? How do we consider ownership of the data and consent for access to this data? Ultimately, within a healthcare setting, this data directly or indirectly comes from patients or healthy donors. And once we have the regulatory and legal mechanisms for sharing this data, it is how do we create a platform that allows this data to be shared in a responsible manner to maximize its applications. We've heard a lot about the challenges of integrating complex data sets. Historically, people started working with what I call unidimensional data, for example, whole genome sequencing data. Now we are getting increasingly complex multidimensional data that actually is no longer static. In other words, we have time series data that's available, which presents an additional level of challenge. And ultimately, we have the challenge or the opportunity of different analytical tools, different analytical approaches, with the caveat that sometimes the underlying principles of these approaches are unclear. We sometimes have black box approaches whereby there are potential conclusions, but really it's difficult to decipher how these conclusions have been arrived at. So I'd like to start with a what I call classical data, right? Data that as clinicians we've had available to us for decades, and looking at how we have been analyzing this data so far and what the opportunities are. I'd like to focus on data that we've been collecting on the immune system. The immune system, of course, as everybody knows, is a complex biological defense system, and from an evolutionary perspective, it was initially evolved to protect hosts against infections. It's active in all cells, in all organs and all tissues, and has a complex range of components, which include cells, proteins, small molecules, antibodies. Now, one of the key players in the immune system are white blood cells, and as clinicians, we've been measuring white blood cells in our patients for decades. There's now increasing evidence that the immune system is not only integral to the physiological response to infection, but actually is fundamental to all aspects of both health and disease. So immune-related conditions such as autoimmune disease and now increasingly with cancers, but also conditions that were not historically associated with immune disorders. So these are neurodegenerative disorders, mental conditions, cardiovascular disease, response to injury and repair, aging. So really, the immune system is the one sort of biological system that underpins the response to injury and normal physiology. Now, what we have on the right-hand side here is a typical reference table, which looks at the components of what we call a full blood count. So this is a test that's performed approximately about 4 billion times per year. It's actually the most common medical test performed, not just a blood test, the most common performed medical test. What we have is this test depicts a number of components. So on the right-hand side, you will see it measures the hemoglobin, the white cell count, which is the total number of white cells in the blood, and then the different components of those. I've highlighted neutrophils and lymphocytes, which are different cell types. What you see is that we have reference ranges for males and females. So if we just concentrate on white blood cells, the top red box, we see that in a male, in a healthy individual, any value between 4 and 11 times 10 to 9 cells per liter of blood is considered normal. So we've had this binary approach to the categorization of this blood test. Remember, this is the most commonly performed medical test worldwide. So if you have a patient or a person and their value is between 4 and 11, that's normal. So what this means is that actually, if your value is 4, you're normal, and if your value goes up to 8, you're still normal. Right now, today, if you go to your physician and say that my white cell count has gone from 4 to 8, the physician, pretty much in all healthcare systems in the world, will say, don't worry about it, you're normal. Now, I remember arriving at medical school, and I thought that this was insane. How is it that we state that these cells are fundamental to our physiology, but actually, if their number doubles or triples, goes up by 300%, that actually we ignore this and we say this is normal. So this is, I think, an indication that actually the classical binary categorization of data is perhaps too simplistic. So is there any data to support this proposition? A number of seminal studies have been performed. So this is one example whereby several 100,000 healthy individuals were followed up in 2 territories, both in New Zealand and in the UK. So these healthy individuals were chosen so as to have no known existing pre-existing medical conditions, and they were adjusted for risk factors such as age, smoking, diabetes, blood pressure, ethnicity, cholesterol, and all the usual things. So these were basically healthy individuals as far as we could determine. And then their total white cell count was determined and followed over time. What you see here in the pink box is relating to this normal range. And what you can see is that the risk of dying is actually, even within the normal range, seems to be related to the total white cell count. Now, this does not illustrate a cause and effect, but it does indicate that actually simply ignoring movement within this vast reference range is too simplistic. Of course, if your total white cell count is very high or very low, you are at much higher risk of dying. But actually within that, if you are, for example, your white cell count is around 5 compared to around 8 or 10, actually you almost triple the risk of dying. Now, there are other studies that looked at the distribution within this normal range, and in this study, they've looked at the subtype of different white blood cells. So we have B cells on the left, monocytes, natural killer cells. The identity of these cells doesn't matter. What I'd like to point out is that actually the percentage of the total number of cells in healthy individuals is very variable. So healthy individuals can have 4% of their white cells that are B cells, or 69%. So again, this I think is indicative that for us to ignore movement within this vast range is probably oversimplistic. So this concept of immunotypes has now emerged to say that actually maybe with more detailed analysis of this data, we may be able to identify particular immune profiles within otherwise healthy populations that could have implications for health and disease. And if we could collect this data and monitor it, we would be able to understand. The key message here is that actually normal population reference values are very wide, and this binary categorization of versus normal abnormal is very crude. In this particular study, what they looked at was the frequency or the percentage of CD8 T cells in the blood. Again, a subpopulation of lymphocytes within the blood. Each color is one individual, and you have age across the bottom. And what you can see is that in some individuals, the proportion of these CD8 T cells goes up. In some cases, it stays fairly static. In some cases, goes down. What they demonstrated in the seminal study was that actually this change in the immune profile was actually a better indication a better indicator of the risk of dying than age. So again, evidence that being able to track components of our immune system has potential implications. Now, so how do we do this? For us to be able to actually track individual components of the immune system has a number of challenges. We need to be able to collect this data in a longitudinal manner and then be able to relate it to the individual both internal and external environment of that particular patient. If we are able to collect this data, then it may be able to offer us insights into disease and healthcare. The problem with this is, well, how do we do this? If you have to wait 2 weeks or more to have a blood test, and we only perform blood tests when we are unwell, then this is not really healthcare. We call it actually, this is sick care or disease care. So how do we create a mechanism that allows us to actually generate normal data in the absence of other known health conditions over a period of time? So this is an example of an approach, is to say, well, what if we could create a point of care device that was safe, it was cheap, it was rapid, and gave reliable and accessible data, and then it could generate, for example, a full blood count, so that actually we could monitor patients' full blood counts over a period of time. So such devices are now being created, and what these devices are utilizing is actually approaches, machine learning approaches to simplify very complex and expensive technologies. So in one example of a particular device, it's an imaging device that I showed you in the previous screen, and using simple mobile phone-based technology, images are taken of cells within the blood. Now, these images are not decipherable to the naked eye, but actually AI approaches are able to classify these cells as some types of blood cells, lymphocytes, eosinophils, and so on, with great accuracy. So here is an application of machine learning and AI that can actually generate data which is reliable and effective. And then if we are able to monitor this data over time, we can actually start to see this huge variance within the healthy population, and then be able to relate it to different health conditions and develop a personalized approach, so that actually we say, look, if somebody's white cell count is normally 6, and then it starts to deviate to 6, 7, 8, 9, and actually this may be a signal for us to monitor rather than wait until it's very abnormal. So there is an opportunity, the vast amounts of data that are being created already from the most commonly performed blood tests, and it's a matter of being able to collect this data in a accessible manner and be able to generate personalized scores. Here is a sort of a hypothetical data of the actual values of a patient that are in blue, and actually the idea is, rather than just comparing them to the maximum minimum values within the population, over time algorithms could learn about that particular patient's baseline and detect deviations from the baseline. So the key thing here is access to high quality longitudinal data in a manner that's scalable. Now, very quickly, a second type of sort of approach, or the second application, is multidimensional data, new data. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this because this was very nicely covered by Andreas and others, but we are now generating increasingly complex multi-omic data. So looking at the mutations within the genome, expression of genes, production of proteins, lipids, and small molecules. And then the idea is that actually, if we're able to integrate that with clinical and experimental data, this could be very, very valuable. So in one particular study in collaboration with Namshek and his group, we've started to look at some of the data that's been generated from same type of, for the same donors, but actually these are partially overlapping data. So if we pick a number of publications, we end up with a very complex puzzle of partially overlapping data sets that have been created. So one of the things is to say, well, actually, if we had these different data sets and they had different types of data, so genetic, transcriptomic, metabolomic, and so on, are we able to create a mechanism for integrating this data? But perhaps very importantly, actually, correlating or relating that data to the clinical parameters that we have available. So this image is designed to indicate the complexity that arises when we start to think about this type of integration. So on the left-hand side, we have clinical data such as the cause of death for the particular patients, their past medical history, smoking, and alcohol consumption. And then we say, well, actually, now we overlay on top of that data that comes from different types of tissues and then different types of data. And then how do we create a mechanism or a pipeline to be able to integrate all this data? These are ongoing work, but actually illustrate some of the challenges when we start to step out from one type of data set and we start to integrate multiple data sets. Now, the acquisition, integration of, and the analytical tools are very important, and hopefully we'll touch on these in discussion. I'd like to finish off, but just to really going back where we started, is that actually it's important that we consider how we generate the data, who has access to it in a responsible and transparent manner, how do we create mechanisms and platforms for integrating this data, and what are the best approaches for analyzing this data. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks so much, Korosh. Very, very helpful and very nice example. Thank you. So I think we are a little behind of schedule. So I think I actually prepared quite a few questions for the panel discussion, but I just want to kind of ask just one question for the panel. And then I think I would like to open up the opportunity to the floor. So, I mean, all of our panelists nicely summarized and also touched on a number of different things in the kind of this domain, what's being happened already in the past or currently. But like I want to ask kind of a little bit about your opinion or perspective on the future in kind of next 5 years. I think this kind of a common question maybe you got frequently. So like I wanted to ask, how do you see these AI applications in this domain is evolving? So particularly so far, it seems like quite incremental or transformational changes, but would you like to see the same happening in 5 years, or is kind of some differently changing in next 5 years? So I would like to ask first, Ellie, maybe.
Thanks, Namshi. Yeah, great question. Well, I think we're already starting to see, I mean, I guess for us, the impact is really, can we make better and more effective drugs for patients using AI, and has it sort of contributed to that? And that's going to be quite difficult, I think, to assess, because there's so many components in the decision-making process when you're not only identifying and prioritizing targets, but then, you know, downstream when you're developing drugs. We're already seeing coming into clinical trials drug molecules that have been designed through AI algorithms, which is quite exciting. And I think we'll probably see more of that. So AI being used in sort of drug candidate discovery. And I think what we'll see is, as we've seen today, that across the clinical pipeline, there'll be aspects where AI has helped reduce, you know, the time it takes for us to analyze all these multi-omics data sets, but also being able to identify novel targets, for example, or novel mechanisms within specific sort of disease areas. And I think as we start to generate more and more granular data through, say, single cell analysis, that we're going to start to see the application of AI through being able to interrogate that data and get answers. So I think it's going to be well, it's exciting times. I think there's not going to be one solution that's going to give us, you know, everything, but I think it's going to have impact probably across the whole pipeline, but where there are specific questions and applications that it can be utilized in. And overall, I think speeding up, hopefully, the time it takes for us to get successful drugs approved and to patients. Yeah,
fantastic. I completely agree. Yeah, thanks so much, Ellie. Can I ask Andres how you think?
Namshi, thanks. Big question. I think in general, then maybe I draw some themes out. I think there's going to be an enormous democratization of machine learning methods. So through AutoML and more readily accessible platforms in order to facilitate and open up the area. So I think that's from scientists to physicians to other clinical care. I think in the next you said 5 years. In the next 5 years, we're going to see a revolution in the availability of linked anonymized data to data scientists through protected environments or whatever the mechanism is. But I think that's really important. I think, as Joe mentioned, the regulators are trying to catch up in terms of understanding what the regulatory frameworks need to be for example, decision support tools, and once those are crystallized out, then I think the path to clinic will be much clearer. And my final point is that I think FDA and other regulators are already appreciating the value of real world data. So I think that machine learning analytics to complement and in some cases, some rare cases, perhaps remove the need for clinical trials, as in randomized prospective clinical trials, is very exciting, and I think we're going to see a big change in that space.
Thanks, Andreas. Yeah. That's really exciting. So that's great, and I would like Joe about this question as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I guess at the moment, the way that AI is being applied is almost as sort of discrete challenges. So like I talked about earlier, in the image analysis space, it's very much kind of focusing on there, or in drug discovery, that's being applied to target identification or compound design and things like that. But you are starting to see now, particularly in the drug design space, companies, or drug discovery space, companies who are starting to build sort of end-to-end platforms. For example, Accenture, I know, brought in a whole capability around sort of target discovery to complement what they had around compound design. So actually, I think where we're really exciting is moving towards a company that has a platform that's able to identify targets, that feeds into another platform that's able to design compounds or antibodies, etc., against those targets, and then something which is able to help to predict how that will perform in the clinic or identify patient stratification case, all in a sort of single kind of analytical pipeline. So actually starting to bring those things together will be really impactful in drug discovery. And I think Andreas on the sort of clinical side of things has talked about that, the making the sort of increase in availability of data is going to increase the ability for people to generate things that will have a clinical impact, and then hopefully the regulators and NICE, etc., will sort out the mechanisms to actually get them deployed. So that will lead to some really kind of impactful things, and we are starting to see that in a more as I said, image analysis focused ones. Some of the sort of, particularly in sort of breath screening, where there's large numbers of cases every year that need to be analyzed, there are starting to be integrated into those workflows AI tools. So hopefully we'll see a sort of steady increase in that over the next few years as well, and hopefully be able to tackle more complex problems like early detection and early warning systems and things like that.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, fantastic. Lastly, I would like Korosh about his opinion, and then I would like to move on to the questions already being asked in the chat function. So yeah, Korosh.
Yeah, great. I mean, I agree with all the panels. I mean, a couple of key issues to pick out. One was Andreas talked about democratization of access to this technology, and I think there probably needs to be some level of standardization or being able to assess actually the quality of data analysis. And we do have this in other fields for other approaches, biological approaches. If you do flow cytometry, well, actually, everybody is able to assess the scientific rigor that you've done your analysis by. I think that's probably is missing at the moment, and that could be an emerging area. And then the other thing is about acceleration, is about the hypotheses that are being generated by the bioinformatics groups, is to actually then being tested in biological systems, so we can actually repeat this cycle of hypothesis generation, experimental validation. This could be in trials, and then refining of the hypothesis. I think we need to accelerate this cycle in order to maximize it.
Great, thank you, Korosh. Yeah, and thanks all the panelists sharing the very nice kind of comments. So I would like to move on to the questions. There are already very interesting questions. First of all, I think Chris asked about about Joe's presentation in particular. So following Joe's point about public perception of AI and the challenge of trust, if AI is going to be applied to population health decision-making, some caution is probably warranted. How might researchers and the clinicians address those legitimate concerns?
I can start trying to answer that. I think that there's two elements to it. I think making sure that any sort of partnerships around AI and data are they're sort of safe, secure, and transparent, and they involve public and patient involvement in that process and decision making to make sure that it feels like they're safe. A lot of the issues that we've experienced of these partnerships have been that they've happened and then suddenly leaked out, and people have been worried about how data is being used. So having sort of systems in place to make sure those partnerships are established correctly, and then also building up some case studies and kind of good news stories to counteract the bad ones about the impact that AI could have. And some of the things we're doing at Cancer Research Horizons is trying to build that up and like explain to people the real benefit of AI and the benefit of sharing data and establishing these partnerships is really important to kind of start changing the perception. At the moment, the only things you hear about other sort of things when it goes wrong, whereas actually there's a huge number of examples where there's been massive impact and it's been very successful. But just trying to kind of create some case studies, create some news around those positive things as well is really, really important to kind of help change that perspective.
Thanks, Joe. And Chris also asked another question. I think it might be for Ellie. Please, could I learn more about AI application in imaging? For example, screening techniques. Are there any link to project or papers here? Is there anyone answer about the imaging? Or Andres?
Sorry, Namshik, the question was about imaging.
Yeah, so he asked where he can actually learn more about AI application in imaging, for example, screening technology.
I see.
Or any other kind of project or papers that may be good to read or watch.
Well, obviously, I can have another shameless plug at the Cambridge Centre for AI and Medicine Summer School, which is available online and recorded, which is great, and will run every year. I think Joe might be in a better place to answer specific review articles, but there's enormous amounts of material out there in terms of methods around computer vision, which are readily accessible. So.
Yeah, the one kind of big example from a sort of collaboration that we've done is a sort of a Google Health paper, which was released in 2020 or 2021 around a collaboration with a research group that we funded in Surrey. So I can try and find that and drop it in the chat. Yeah,
I know one example between Microsoft Research and the University of Cambridge Adams Hospital, where they're using the Xbox kinetics function to read the medical imaging for the cancer patient, and then actually they call this as an inner eye. I think they have publication. I don't call exact title for the paper, but that could be one example, I guess. But anyway, there are a few other questions like, is there anyone maybe answer this? Like, what are the good databases to get clinical data in order to develop good models? I think I assume it's machine learning models. So is there any kind of practical answer to help those questions? Of course, OpenTarget is definitely the really good database, but
yeah, it depends what kind of clinical data you're wanting to get hold of. Obviously, we've got clinical trial data in there and disease association data with genetics. Clinical data is quite tricky if you're talking about electronic medical records and access to that. But the UK Biobank obviously is a great data source as well.
And also NIHR and Genomics England and also Cambridge University are working on Synapse, a project recently launched, which is also kind of part of the aim of this is to build up those kind of good databases. So hopefully that's been very helpful. Also, there are some questions about Ellie.
Yeah, about the failed clinical trials.
Yeah.
So I think the question here is there data in the public domain to collaborate with each sponsor, I guess, of the trial? So they're wanting to identify cases where using novel delivery systems could potentially solve the safety hurdles. So I would say, in the Open Targets platform, we provide the data on why those clinical trials have failed. You could pull that out. You'd then probably have to contact for each relative clinical trial the sponsor of those and investigate whether you could collaborate with them on that.
Great, thank you. So this is it for just now, but like as I said, please move on to the Connect Health Tech. I think in the chat function, there will be a link so you can easily click on and then move on to the next session. So thanks again for all the people attended today, and in particular for our panelists. Thanks so much for your really valuable comment, and also asking some, already answering questions in the chat function. That's fantastic. So thanks so much, Krosh and Ellie and Andreas and Joe. And hopefully we can have another meeting soon. So thanks so much again. Bye now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.